I wanted to talk a little bit about your violin. So you play on a Guarneri del Gesù violin, and you used to play on a Stradivari violin. A lot of people have heard of Stradivari, but fewer have heard of del Gesù. Tell me a little bit about your violin and how the Mendelssohn may be factored a little in your choice of that violin.
I always thought of myself as being maybe more suited to Strads, to the Stradivari violins, which tend to be a little bit maybe more brilliant and bright in the sound. The sound production is the response is very fast, very easy. I thought it suited me quite well. Then one day I met this violin, the Guarneri del Gesù. Yes, these two makers are sort of considered maybe at least for violins, it's different for cellos and other instruments, but for violins, to be the two greatest makers. They were both in the same city around the same time. Del Gesù did not live as long, so he didn't make as many violins, and they're quite different from one another. So not all of them are maybe at the very top level, but he did make a lot of extraordinary violins that tend to be a little bit sort of warmer in sound, a little bit sort of richer, earthier, perhaps. And whereas this Stradivari sound ideal was a little bit more this sort of brilliant sound, less round and maybe a little bit less warmth. But that's a generalization, because you do sometimes find Strads that go also in this direction, and this is actually happens to be a del Gesù that is actually quite brilliant on the top register. So it's not quite so clear cut always. But when I saw this violin, basically I was offered this loan, and it's a very famous one because it was played by Hendrik Szerying, the Polish virtuoso that who in the second half of the 20th century was just a major figure, and I had many of his recordings growing up, and he played on this violin for 30 years and recorded most of his recordings on it. And I remember listening to his recordings. I also remember that there was once a poster of this violin in, I think it was in Strag magazine. They used to have these centerfolds, basically, but they were violins.
Centerfold of a violin.
But they were violins. I remember looking at that, and it was this one.
Wait, how old is this violin? Just so we know.
Okay, so it was made in 1744, and they think it's one of the last ones, or perhaps the last one he made before he died. So it's a little bit after Stradivarius died. That would have been in the 30s. His last violins, early 1730s. He's referred to as del Gesù. His real name is Giuseppe Guarneri, but his father was also Giuseppe Guarneri. So to distinguish him, they call him del Gesù, and it's because he on the labels he would put a cross, like it was the Jesuit symbol that you put on the label.
The label is inside
the violin. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
The thing though is, it was not really meant as like a religious signal. It is actually basically a calling card, the label. The idea was, if you saw this violin and you liked it, you would look inside the label and you would see made in Cremona, and you would see this thing, the Jesuit symbol. You would then go to Cremona, to the Jesuit church, and opposite the church was his shop. So it just like basically told you where to find him. Oh. But you won't find a shop there now, obviously. But that's sort of how he came by this nickname. I saw this violin, I was blown away by the beauty of the sound. It was very different from the Strad I had before. And it's true that the Mendelssohn Concerto was one of the things that convinced me, because the theme of the second movement, which is played on the A string, I sometimes felt on the Strad, it didn't quite have the warmth, the kind of sound that I was imagining. When I tried it on this violin, I felt like, oh, that's it. I could sense it, even though I wasn't used to the violin yet. I felt like it's there. I can finally maybe get to it. I was having then so much fun just by basically playing through parts of the repertoire. That's kind of what convinced me. Because it's a difficult step when you change a violin, especially between these two makers, because the violins are it's a very different way of making violins. Then you have to also change your playing quite a lot. And I used to basically play with I have to basically play with much more energy in my right arm, and kind of like more, it's a more physical process, because you need basically more strength to get the sound out of the violin. Many adjustments that I had to make, but it was the sound that sort of drew me in this direction, That particular shift up on the A string on this violin just had a certain natural way of singing that I found on this Strad quite quite hard because the sound was very, very sort of pristine and focused, and didn't quite just sing in such a relaxed way. And that was, I think, so that was one of the moments.
That was really beautiful. That was really, really beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks.
Definitely can see why he wanted that violin, but then I'm pretty sure it sounded beautiful on the Strat as well.
Right.
So what is it like to play the Mendelssohn Concerto or any other concerto with a group like LACO, with a chamber orchestra, rather than like a full orchestra?
Basically, the forces of the orchestra are smaller, and they're used to playing in a smaller configuration. A chamber orchestra usually doesn't play, the Mahler symphonies. They're used to playing this kind of repertoire from the classical and sort of early romantic periods, and then there's a few other things that are small enough in size, but basically the fact that they always play this way makes chamber orchestra players often listen to each other a certain way, and because you have fewer players, they tend to maybe also give a little more of themselves, a little bit of more energy. So there are certain things that I like very much when it's Beethoven concerto or Mendelssohn, particularly when it's like a Mozart concerto. With a chamber orchestra, I find it's a little bit more, the ensemble can sometimes be more nimble, and the communication sort of more direct, because they are used to sitting close together and making music in such a close, direct way with each other. I think that's probably the main draw of the chamber orchestra experience. But then, of course, the repertoire is more limited. It's actually just in the violin repertoire, I feel like it's just when it gets really good that you already reach the end of the chamber music repertoire. So already Mendelssohn has like more wins than like many chamber orchestras, like will want to use it. And then eventually you get to the point where, composers ask for 4 horns, and then and then there's a trombone, and then it becomes like eventually reach the point when it's too big for a chamber orchestra. I think Mendelssohn works quite well with fewer people, actually.
Yeah.
Not as many string players, and then each person kind of playing their part a little bit more soloistically. There's a certain intensity that the piece gets that I rather like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you came to Los Angeles about, 10 years ago, and played the Beethoven Concerto with LACO. And what are your memories of that? And what makes it special to come to Los Angeles?
I love coming in LA, but it's especially when it's it's already quite cold, like in the rest of the country, and I come here and it's so nice and warm and sunny. And
where is it that you live, actually?
I live in Connecticut now. Close to New Haven. It is still not very far away from New York City, but before I was living for over 15 years in New York City. So I still kind of think of myself as a New Yorker sometimes. But last time I came, I was definitely still living in New York. So yeah, I love coming to LA, and I have great memories of my last time with LACO, with the Beethoven. Yes, it was a very fresh performance, because it did not have the sort of like large symphonic quality to it, but was more kind of a little bit more classical in the approach.
You've worked with Jaime Martin before, not with LACO, doing a European tour?
Yes. Originally, it was a tour that Neville Mariner was supposed to conduct it. He was someone I worked with a number of times, but then he died just before this tour. But Jaime Martin was the music director of the orchestra of this Cadaqués orchestra in Barcelona. He stepped in and conducted very beautifully, I remember. And we played Beethoven and Mendelssohn actually on the tour, so kind of alternating. And on one of the concerts, Jaime could not make it, and we did it without conductor. But then I was thinking afterwards, it worked very well, but it worked very well because we had just rehearsed it with him and performed it with him, and there was a special energy he brought to the piece that I enjoyed a lot. Yeah, I'm very excited to see him again.
Augustin, it's been great to talk with you about your violin, about the Mendelssohn, and I look forward to when we talk again.
Me too. It was so great to see you again.